going well with you. I'm just in a good mood today, feeling very good, just in a happy mood. So I hope that you are happy and things are going well with you and your family. God bless you. It's not a bad time to be in a good mood. It's never a bad time to be in a good mood, right? That's what they say. We're going to talk a little bit about Nubian priestesses today. So I want to kind of talk about Nubian priestesses and talk about that with respect to ancient Kemet. But I hope that you're feeling well. Sometimes you just get God's joy. So I hope that you are waking up today, that you've started your day or in the middle of your day or wherever you may be, the end of your day, and that you are filled with joy and happiness. That's what life is about. When you think about it, and it's not about all the things that people try to get. It's really about enjoying where you are and who you are. So whatever that situation may be, whatever your circumstances are, doing the best you can to be in life and just being happy. I mean, that's really what fulfillment is. And as we think about, and we talk about priestesses today, and we talk about the idea of God and Nubian priestesses and ancient Kemet and some of the Kemetic, rituals and that type of thing, it's all about happiness. If you are not fulfilled, if you're somehow not experiencing Hotep, right? If you're not experiencing a state of peace, then what is it all for? And that's what I hope for you. I hope that you can just enjoy and do something that you love. And, the work that a person does brings them closer to God. They say, the work that a man does brings them closer to God. So anybody, right? The work that you do brings you closer to God and should hopefully make you happy. And so whatever that may be, whether it's a hobby or something that you work on, I'm really praying that you have happiness in your life. And I thank you so much for those who are watching and people who've been, donating. Donna T, I want to give you a shout out. Thank you so much for blessing. And in the past couple episodes, if you will, giving a donation, I very much appreciate it. Those types of things help this continue. It helps, it's a lot of work. It's a lot to join. And those people who just say thank you, or if you subscribe, or if you just like this, share this with somebody, if you give a donation, whatever you may do to may help this really helps me keep going and help people like us to continue to do this. So I want to kind of talk a little bit about priestesses today. And as I was thinking about that, just having fun with this, just thinking about this and being happy as I think about it, because the whole idea of religion and the whole idea of priesthood and priestesses and things of that nature is being able to minister to your soul, right? When we think about the Kemetic women as well as the Nubian women, we're going to focus on Nubian women today, who were priestesses in ancient Kemet. That whole idea was being able to interact and to touch your soul. I mean, we talked yesterday about there being, Herodotus talking about in his history, he's talking a lot about there being, an idea when they sacrifice certain animals that they would sacrifice a certain male cattle in a certain way that to make sure that cattle was without blemish. But when they went to female cattle or with cows, they wouldn't sacrifice them. And part of that was because of their respect for Heteru and for Isis. And the whole idea what women played and that idea of being significant, that idea of being a priestess, you were somebody who was representing and touching God in a special way. People were supposed to be able to come to you and feel that they're being a connection with God. I mean, this whole idea, and we're going to talk about Shepenwepet II, but we're also going to talk about others as well. This whole idea of being God's wife of a man. If you were in the temple of Karnak, of Ipet Sut, in the New Kingdom, or wherever that may be, like she was in the Lake Kingdom, in the Lake era, in the Lake period, if you will, and people were relying on you for being a connection with God, or were coming to you in some way and looking for guidance, or hoping that you would intercede on behalf of the king, so that God would be, beneficial and gracious toward the land, and so that the things in the land would succeed. They were looking to you for a connection. They were looking for you to do more than just pray, looking for you to do more than just look a certain way or dance or to sing a certain chant. There was supposed to be a connection there. And I think that's become very significant because a lot of these things obviously would not have lasted for so long. God bless you. Hope you, Donnie Williams, God bless you. And Willa, how do you? God bless you. A lot of these things, we think about it from a religious standpoint, would not have lasted so long if they didn't connect with people. A Western way of looking at a lot of the religion the ancient Kemetic people practice, and various people in general, is to say that it was a power structure and it was a way to hold on to power and to wield power, because that's the way we think, right? And not to say that necessarily wasn't, but it was also something that connected with people, because you don't get that kind of power, you don't get that kind of cooperation, you don't get that kind of long lastingness and longevity unless you're touching people, unless you're impacting people's lives. And today we know about it because we think about things in terms of mental health, we think about emotional health, we think about reclaiming your peace. Simone Biles did a lot. We're talking about making sure you have your own mental health and you protect your own era, when you're dealing with things that are stressful for you. We talk about that a lot now, but we don't really talk about how you minister to that. And that's where religion, that's where your priestesses came in. That's where this comes in, where there's a part of our lives that is our spirits, our souls, that are connected with obviously everything we do and how we see the world and how we feel about the world and how we experience the world, whether we're having joy or not. And that becomes the most important thing in life. life. And so when you start to think about this, as we talk about, the priestesses did more than just perform rites. So as we jump into, I want to talk a little about this, the whole concept and the timeline when you see certain times where you will see Nubian priestesses in ancient Kemet. And I want to just pull this up here because as I take a look at that, you can see right there on the bottom, kind of the bottom left-hand corner, you can see that square figure there that in the very middle is a ramp. At the top of the screen is Hatshepsut's famous temple. That's her mortuary temple right there. When she built that temple, when she had that temple built, she built it right next to Mentuhotep II's temple. And that temple below is his temple. And that square with that ramp there, the smaller kind of square figure with the ramp right there. In the middle, that was probably a pyramid. So this was probably a remarkable resource and a remarkable place here. His temple, there being a pyramid in the middle of it, that huge ramp leading up to it, the square base, and in it they found a number of things that let us know about his wives and priestesses that were priestesses of Het Heru. So as we talk about, I want to kind of jump into that and kind of give some perspective with that. God bless you. Thank you so much. Thank you much for joining. I appreciate it. Give some kind of perspective with that, because as we talk about that, it becomes important, because a lot of times we will put ancient Kemetic people in a certain era, right? And we will put Nubians obviously in a certain era. And just because we talk about Nubians doesn't mean that Nubian and Kemetic people were not connected. It doesn't mean they don't have this, they didn't share the same heritage, or they were not black or anything like that. Just because we talk about, I think it's very important to understand that we talk about the Urjet or the Wawet or the Setu or the Yam people, that we're giving them their respect in their own right, that we're not just going to talk about them with respect to someone else, that we understand that they were people in their own right and they developed their distinct societies and their distinct political organizations, and that's why we should call them by their names when we have their names to call by. And sometimes we'll use Nubian because we're using general terms, but it's important for us to know that just because we talk about our Nubian brothers and sisters, it doesn't mean that they're disconnected from or somehow not related or somehow do not have the same heritage as Kemetic people. They develop different political entities. So just like someone might be from Arizona, it doesn't mean they're not connected to somebody from California. They're in a different political entity and they develop slightly different customs and ways and traditions, but they are of the same heritage. they are related. They're connected in some way. So as we think about that and we talk about ancient Kemet, I just want to look at this timeline that you guys have probably seen and know that I've been working on. As you kind of look at this timeline, as we go through and look at a bunch of things with respect to ancient Kemetic history and things that are going on, the whole area of the Nile Valley, as you know, is connected. And whether you're going back hundreds of thousands of years or thousands of years ago in Nabta Playa, or you're going to Nakada and looking at whether it's A group Nubians or Kusto or people who are in Nakada, you see a connection in terms of burial customs, pottery, geographic locations, trade, all that's going on, and all types of intercourse and interactions are taking place. And, we begin to see that Nakada period, and the people who are there in ancient Nakada, who around this area of ancient Kemet, around this area right here of ancient Kemet, we're above Auset from a pre-dynastic standpoint, they just become a culture that just morphs into, just delves right into the dynastic era. So you don't see much of a break when it comes to archaeologically speaking, and even from some of the traditions, if you will, that's going on in pre-dynastic Kemet and what becomes dynastic Kemet. So this whole area is connected, and it's kind of one wave. We like to kind of put a line in the sand, but there's no line in the sand. It's more like a wave, and it's more like a continuum of things that are going on. And as Kemet developed into Kemet and had its own political entity and began to develop, organizations, not only did they develop organizations, people around them as well were either a part of them, absorbed into them, a part of the same heritage, or developed their own organizations. So it's not surprising that when you go through ancient Kemet and you kind of go through this timeline, you begin to see people who are of Nubian origin and people who are of Nubian political entities, if you will, entities that develop within their own right and their own traditions, even though they had the same heritage or right next to Kemetic people. You see them interacting all the time. You see them interacting all types of trade, all types of goods that are going back and forth. You see them interacting with respect to even the armies. And we talked about that when we were talking about the autobiography of Winnie and talking about him mentioning that they had many, many Nubian troops in the battles that he fought against the Sand Dwellers, the Asiatic people in the Old Kingdom. He had Nubian troops. Even Sneferu before that talks about conquering, if you will, Nubian lands and bringing back thousands of people in his area into Kemet. So there's all kinds of interactions going on with Nubian people who are just their own political entities. Doesn't mean that they don't have the same heritage. They just have a different organization. They had different leaders, if you will, and they called themselves by different names because they had different leaders. And when you think about that, not only do you see this, interaction when it comes to Nubian soldiers, but you also see from a priesthood perspective, you see some interesting things pop up. And we have evidence and archaeological evidence to talk about, even in the Middle Kingdom. Even when we started to get into the time when Mentuhotep II is kind of running things, and I'm sure there are many people down below, probably in the comments, who know about Mentuhotep II, that there's a lot that's taking place with him. As we kind of look at Mentuhotep II, let's just kind of get a little bit of a picture of him as we start to think about him and talk a little bit, kind of put him up on the screen here so we can get a look at Mentuhotep II. As we look at him, he is the founder of the Middle Kingdom, and he is the person whose magnificent tomb there at the bottom that we're talking about there. And in that tomb, there were several things found in that tomb that let us know a bit about his wives. And as they looked at his wives, he had several wives that were buried in that tomb right along kind of the west wall, right on the back of it. There were several tombs there, and you found his wives, and his wives were priestesses of Hathor. They were priestesses of Heteru. They were serving in a high, not just his wives from just a wife. I'm just playing a wifely role. These were legitimate priestesses of Heteru, and this is in the Middle Kingdom. And you can kind of see here, as I'll kind of draw this up so you can take a look at it. This is from an article or a presentation, a document that looked at developing the temple and looking at the whole temple of El Bari and looking at what was found there. This is back from 1910. So you can look at Eduardo Neville and look at this and be able to see what he wrote about it. And I'll just take a look and a peek at it. And he talks about the queens and the tombs that were found of the queens in Mentuhotep II's pyramid, in his tomb, in his temporary. And he talks about the queens. You see, Queen Auset was one of them. Queen Auset was one of them. You can see there on the left, and you can see on the right. He had Saite and Queen Kawit. And he talks about, interesting enough, as you're reading these, it's kind of amazing. But when you look at them, it's clear that these women were black. There were several tombs, areas there where they had colored pictures, and you could see that these were women who were clearly dressed in a certain way and clearly were representing not just simple blackness, but also of a Nubian nature. And so when you look at this, it is commonly accepted and known that his wives, that he had Nubian priestesses as his wives, and he had several wives who were of Nubian origin, and I'll kind of give you a perspective of one of them here, who are of Nubian. This is the sister getting her hair done. Just imagine the significance of it when you think about, I'm going to be a priestess. And, it's not just the significance that they may have been from a different political organization from a Nubian perspective, and that they are, at a high-ranking officials in ancient Kemet. One of the people never tell you that, for one. People don't talk about, Nubian priests. They just don't talk about them as if they weren't there, or as if the people in the Middle Kingdom were not existing, as if this gentleman did not exist. They just don't talk about it. But just think about, just not the fact that she was there and they were there at a high level, but what were they doing as priestesses? What was their role? That whole idea to be able to connect with God, that whole idea, the idea of Heteru, because they were, a lot of times you would see women in ancient Kemet and they are priestesses of Heteru, and that, people will call that Hathor, they'll call it Hathor, but it's Heteru. And Heteru symbolizes the house of Heru. She is the house through which Heru is born. So think about that for a minute. His wives are priestesses of Heteru. They are connected with Heteru. They are representatives of Heteru. And the king is supposed to be Heru. And so when you think about that, being a priestess of Heteru, you are the thing that the will is born into. So if you think of Heru as being a champion, Heru as being an aspect of yourself, a divine aspect of yourself, where your will is developed and you can accomplish things you never knew you could accomplish. You could be strong as a bull. You could have courage in the face of danger. You could be able to rise to the situation where you're fighting your Uncle Set, symbolically, and you're fighting those things in your life. How do you give birth to that? How do you give birth to that will so that you can act that way in your life? Well, the idea was that you did it through Heteru. You did it through the house of Heru, the house within which Heru is born. And that, for a lot of people, is like your imagination, is what you dream about, is what you allow yourself to meditate on, what you allow yourself to almost dance on in your mind, what you allow yourself to mantra on your mind. And that's what a lot of the Kemetic women and Nubian women were doing as priestesses. They were monitoring, they were praying, they were dancing, and they weren't just doing it for some superficial reason. They were doing it for a purpose, to be able to bring about the type of will and to bring about the type of actions that needed to be taking place in the land. And that's why Kemetic people and Nubian people had a great respect for Heteru and had a great respect for the cow, right? Because you saw the cow with the moon in between, you would see the horns, you see that depicted a lot. That whole idea was that you were connecting with your will and you were connecting with your imagination. Imagine if you could be in a situation where even from the young children, our young children could grow up seeing themselves, ideating on themselves as being godlike, ideating on themselves as being successful, ideating on themselves as being successful, whatever it is they want to do, whether that's math or science or whether that's, some type of carpentry, or they want to be in whatever they might want to be, not seeing themselves as being limited. And we talk about this a lot, and I kind of want to jump on the subject a little bit. You guys can tell me what you think. There you go. Faith comes to that. Keep rooms are from Nubia. There's a connection there. So we can definitely talk about it. Feel free to put some more down below in terms of where the rulers are from. But, think about that whole significance. We talk so much about how representation is important. And I've seen that a lot as people look at, famous things like things that happen in the Olympics. And you see a lot more people in recent Olympics time where it's open. You see much more diversity in areas where things were shut off. Or you see, maybe in newspaper or in places in politics in certain areas where you see representation makes a difference. Why does representation matter, right? Think about that. When you see children mimicking people that they see look like themselves, why is that important? The whole idea is so that child can believe and know that they can do it, right? That whole idea around belief, that whole idea around understanding and not just thinking and hoping, knowing that you can do it, having that connection, which is what this Heteru was all about, having that connection that you actually can do it, that you can actually bring these things about. The Kemetic people did not practice this religion for 3,000 years and not believe that it was true. They didn't practice for 3,000 years and did amazing things and not see evidence of it being true, not see evidence of it manifesting in their lives, in their kingdoms, in their wives, and their children, their husbands, and that type of thing. And so you start to see that it's not just about kind of hoping or just believing. It's really having that connection with this is real, really channeling that and understanding I'm going to take everything inside me, my spirit, my will, my imagination, my thoughts, everything I have to channel into to do something I believe is great, to do something I want to do. So imagine that child having that growing up, having that healthy nurturing where I want to do this, I want to go become this. And I have my mind is telling me that, my spirit, my imagination, my thoughts are all channeling into and all supporting me going to become whatever it is I want to become. That child will be what that child wants to become. It's almost 100% guaranteed that child's going to be with 99.9% accuracy or 95% accuracy. That person is going to be what they want to be if they put all of that into it. And that becomes why this was religion. A lot of times we look at it in terms of being, crazy or being, have name heathenism and that type of thing. But at the end of the day, they're doing a lot of the things that we talk about today. They literally were talking about doing a lot of the things that we talk about today. Talk about having positive mindset. Talk about having images in front of you that look like you, that encourage you to be where you want to be. Talk about, different things with yin and yang and there being balance. They talked about ma'at and order back then. Talking about there being, having times to pray and being inside yourself. All of those things. And it's not that there aren't other people. Many people around the world have found these things out and have discovered these things, but they were also doing it here. And I think it's important for us not to ignore that they were doing and not to ignore that there were Nubian people specifically also doing this, that it wasn't just one group of people, that there were this whole area in the Nile Valley was participating at various points in times. We have evidence of it in this whole idea that you can be you could be what you want to be. You have to control what you put in your mind. And I think about that all the time. It's like food. If you're giving your child or if you're giving yourself bad things to eat from a mental standpoint, things that are not healthy for you, you got to cut it out. You got to cut out distractions that make you think other things. You got to cut those things out of your life, because the more you allow yourself to ideate on negative thoughts and things that bring you down, the more you're not going to be able to accomplish. The more you're going to pull your own stuff back because you won't even believe it. Your spirit won't be a part of it. You won't have your thoughts associated with it. Your actions won't follow. So this lady here was one of the wives of King Mentuhotep II, and this is Kawit right here, and you can see her getting her hair done. That was part of her whole thing. That was part of the house of Aru. That was a part of their job, to be able to manifest. This is the energy. This is the priestess that helps to bring forth the idea of your will, that helps to bring forth Aru, helps to bring forth that which will become king. helps to bring it forth in an amazing way. And a lot of Kemetic people and Kushite people, kings, had an understanding that this was a male-female thing, that this wasn't a situation where you put down where one aspect of God was not venerated, just like they venerated Auset, they venerated Ausar. And we just ourselves don't look back at it that way, but a lot of times it was practiced in that way. And a lot of times you will find women in very significant roles in ancient Kemet, not just in roles that were just of servants or subservient roles, because they understood that this whole idea of being able to bring forth that which is like God inside you had to come from all aspects of yourself. You can't pull back part of your life. You can't pull back part of your community and make these things be not as strong as they could be and contribute as much as they could be and think you're going to be successful. You can't take a part of your community and do that. You can't take somebody from a different ethnicity or gender or whatever and pull them back and say, we're going to be as strong as we can. Just like you can't take your talents and your abilities and your soul and your spirit and put them under a leaf, or put them under your bed, or don't shine a light on them and think you're going to be the best you can. You have to take all your talents that God gave you. And from a Kemetic perspective, they did that, and they did that with priestesses. I mean, let's face it, there have been a lot of religious beliefs, if you will, and religious sects that have not even looked at women as being respectable, have not looked at women as being in leadership positions. There's some still today where you don't have female priests. You may not have there's never been a female pope. There's never been a female pope. But you can look back in Kush, and you can look back in ancient Kemet, and you can see women leading armies. You can see women heads of state. You can see women as high priestesses. You can see women in very powerful roles. And even to this day, there have been areas where we haven't had a female pope or female imams, various places like that. You don't see them. And in a lot of places around the world, that whole idea of taking every aspect of your being, every aspect of your society, and every aspect of yourself, your mind, your heart, your spirit, your desires, your strength, all parts of you to help you accomplish what you want to accomplish. And sometimes we'll think about it as if there's one side that's stronger than the other. That maybe, if you have, muscles, that's what makes you strong, but not necessarily. That will make you strong from a physical standpoint if you use them right. But if you don't have the will to do something, you will never step out and do it anyway. You need to be strong and have healthy mentally. You need to be healthy spiritually. You need to be healthy emotionally. You need to have faith, right? There's so many different aspects of yourself. And a lot of Kemetic people understood and respected. I needed to have as much courage as I had muscles, right? They say, economics is being able, and demand is being willing and able to buy something. Well, you have to be willing and able to do something if you want to be successful, right? And so that whole idea is I got to be able to have the will to do it and the courage to do it, the mindset to do it, and the wisdom to follow through on how to do it. And that requires different parts of my mind, different parts of my spirit. So you find Kemetic and Nubian women and men practicing these things in order for success, looking for success for the kingdom, looking for success for the people, looking for food for the people, looking for prosperity for the people, making sure that they're putting your health and happiness. And this whole idea around Hotep and this whole idea of satisfying God or you being satisfied, because Hotep sometimes kind of refers to peace and satisfaction. That whole idea runs kind of deep, as well as the whole idea of Ma'at, that if you experience Ma'at, if your heart can weigh against that feather and balance out, you can spend eternity in peace, eternity peacefully. That whole concept of that was a concept that they looked at in your behavior, your morality, how you treated God's creatures, how you ministered to God's creatures, including yourself, right? That all being feeding into the idea of Ma'at, and there being balance and there being peace in that. And so as we look at that, and we look at this as being, in the Middle Kingdom, right around this area, it isn't just the Middle Kingdom where you find Nubian women in significant roles in priesthoods. And, we talked a little bit about this yesterday, but I want to also touch on, as you kind of go through the New Kingdom and you go into the late period and you start to see the 25th Dynasty and various things, you have other very famous women that pop out in history. This doesn't mean these were all, but you have other famous women who pop out in history, in particular around this whole area when you get the Kushites ruling, because it's not surprising as you begin to see Kush even do more and come back into the scene from a historic standpoint, a historic documentation standpoint, that you see women front and center. You see the idea of respect for women, the idea of women being in very strong positions. And as I'm sharing with right here, we're just going to kind of talk a little bit about Shepenwepet II. And she is over there on the far right-hand side of the screen. She is of the whole the whole 25th dynasty. She's of that whole idea on the whole dynasty with respect to Kashta and Piankhy. And she becomes a significant person in terms of Ipet at the temple of Karnak and becomes God's wife of Amen. So we're going to talk a little bit about her as well, because there's another, as I mentioned, Nubian priestess that's there that's significant in history. So God bless you. Okay, God bless you. Never count this. Okay. So as we start to look at that, God bless you. We'll make sure we'll do that. So as we start to look at that, we'll talk a little bit about her, because she becomes also a significant person as we talk about her. And she, as we will kind of jump into, she becomes a significant person. So Shepenwepet II, as I mentioned before, she is someone who is a part of that 25th dynasty. But in addition to that, she becomes someone who becomes literally one of the most powerful people in Kemet. She becomes the most powerful person, or one of the most powerful people at the temple of Karnak or Ipet. So when she is alive, when she is born, and her family takes over Kemet and comes in, they come into the upper part of Kemet, in the southern part of the area, and she begins to not only be there, because her father is Piankhy, who takes over, and her grandfather is Kashta, and her aunt is Amenadiris, who's also God's wife of Amen. They become significant roles. They become significant figures. And this is a time where she's not seen as a foreigner. She's not seen as somebody coming in from the outside who doesn't know the Kemetic ways. They are welcome. When Piankhy comes, he is embraced as the leader of Kemet. He is embraced as someone who is following their rules and following the customs of Kemet. And it was his father who helped to unite not only the upper part of Kemet and lower part, the upper part of Nubia and lower part of Nubia, but he did upper Kemet as well. So he was following in his father's footsteps. So you begin to have a whole connection, a whole line here in the 25th dynasty. But Shepenwepet II is somebody who, when she becomes God's wife of Amen, the whole idea behind it was that this person, you always talk about Queen Kawit, and begin to talk a little bit about her with respect to her being somebody significant who was a priestess of Het. So she was a priestess during the Middle Kingdom, one of the wives of Mentuhotep II. This is the Middle Kingdom, thousands of years before, more than 1,000 years before Shepenwepet II. She is a priestess of Het. But when Shepenwepet II comes on the scene, she's a priestess of Amen. She's a priest. She's God's wife. She is like the divine devotee, the divine consort, the divine companion, if you will, of Amen. And she is responsible for literally helping to make sure that the king has a good relationship with Amen. So just like Het was significant when it comes to Heru, the God's wife of Amen, was significant when it comes to Amen. So she was responsible for making sure that the king, who at that time would have been her family members, was successful and was in the right relationship with Amen. That was her job. And in doing so, she had a lot of stuff, a lot of resources that went toward that. So as we start to look at that, there's a significant document that I want to kind of share that we'll touch on a little bit, that you may want to read or take a look at, that it gives you an idea of some of the things they did. Because during her time, she was alive during the time of the 25th dynasty and the 26th dynasty. And you see right here, this is King Psamtik the first, and he is one of the kings of the 26th dynasty. And during this time, during that rule, as they were in charge and things were going on there, they had different things that they were looking at, different challenges, because after the 25th dynasty and the Kushite people were left and went back to Napata, the 26th dynasty took over, and there was a whole ceremony that had to take place between his daughter, his child, and her becoming the next God's wife of men. A whole ceremony and position had to take place. As this gentleman here, Psamtik the first, became king of Kemet, and he was trying to solidify his rule, if you will, he had to make sure that Shepenwepet, right here on the left, that she, on the very right, that she was somebody who would be willing to give her inheritance over to his daughter. And this was not something that could be done in a fight. Like, this wasn't something where he could go in and just start fighting and make her, leave. That wasn't something that he could do. He had to be able to do this in a way that really kind of walked through a number of things. He had to be able to do this way where it was a transition that took place peacefully. It could not be something where Shepenwepet was physically or emotionally or under threat of arms and threat of violence, taking her position and giving it to his daughter. It had to be somewhere it was done in almost a contracted way. They did it almost like with a contract, and in doing so, it shows you the power. It shows you that they didn't always go about things in terms of a violent way. And if they wanted to have the will of the people and the support of the priests and the priestesses, and they wanted to have the religion behind them, they had to do this in a way that was honorable. They had to do this in a way that was according to their tradition. So when when he came about and he came on the scene and he was now the new king and the Kushite dynasty was over, Shepenwepet didn't leave. She was still God's wife of Amen. She was still basically in charge of Ptahhotep II. That didn't change. A whole ceremony had to place. And he talks about right here in this particular, and this is a document that where he basically documents and talks about his desire to make his daughter become the new God's wife of men. So I'll just share this real quick. He's talking about, I am his son. I'm the son of God, the son of our men. I'm first in his favor. God got me for himself to satisfy his heart. That, I have given to him my daughter to be the divine consort, that she may evoke protection for the king more than those who were before her, that she may indeed be satisfied, that he may indeed be satisfied with her prayers, and that he may protect the land of him who gave him to her. When you think about it, so this is giving you some idea of what the God's wife of men had to do. The whole idea was that her prayers were going to help to protect the king and be a significant role for the king. So even before Psamtik's daughter becomes the next God's wife of men, Shepenwepet II is doing it, as well as her aunt Amenadiris is doing it. And they're Nubian. They're part of the 25th dynasty. They're playing a significant role where their prayers are there to intercede on behalf of the king and on behalf of the kingdom. And this scene is a very important ritual, a very significant thing, one that wasn't played with, so much so that Psamtik would not just go in there and just take it over and just take over Ptahhotep II and take over Karnak. He had to do it in a certain way. So as he's writing this and talking about, he talks about that he knows, and I'll just kind of read this part. You can take a look at it. I've heard it saying that a king's daughter of Taharqa. So he's talking about Taharqa, and he's talking about Shepenwepet II's niece. So there was another woman who was of Nubian origin in line to be the God's wife of the men, the high priestess at Karnak, Ptahhotep II. There was another woman who was Shepenwepet's niece who was going to be the next God's wife of men. That had already taken place. That ceremony had already taken place. And Psamtik I is talking about that. He said, so, I've heard saying that a king's daughter of Taharqa, and he calls Taharqa the triumphant, right, is there, his daughter's there, and to whom he gave to his sister for her to be the great daughter, who was there to serve the divine votress. I'm not one to expel an heir from his place, for I'm a king who loves truth. My particular abomination is lying. I hate lying. I am a son protecting his father, taking the inheritance of Keb and uniting the two portions as a youth. Hence I give her, Necrotis, which is his daughter, to Shepenwepet II to be the great daughter, as her father Piankhy once conveyed her to his sister Amenadiris. Here this man is saying right here, he's basically saying that the Shepenwepet II was basically inherited and given as a part, and it had a ceremony that put her as a part of this divine devotee, if you will, of Amen, and that she got that role from her sister, her aunt, Amenadiris, then Shepenwepet, then Amenadiris II. These were all Nubian women, all a part of the 25th dynasty, all a part of the people that he's referring to here, and how this whole ceremony took place. And it took place in a way so that one person can be adopted. Literally, the queen, who was the Nubian woman who was in charge, Shepenwepet had to adopt his daughter. She had to adopt Necrotis, his daughter Necrotis, in order for Necrotis to become God's wife of men. It couldn't be that he came in and just put her there. Shepenwepet II had to adopt her. And essentially what she had to do is she had to take not only her inheritance, and the inheritance was going to go to her niece, and they both had to basically sign a contract. And they both signed a contract basically saying, we bless you now, the new person, the new daughter, who's going to be the great granddaughter, the great daughter, if you will, and the great person who's going to be the new devotee of God, the devotee of men. We're going to bless you and kind of give our blessing so that you can now take over this important role. And so that's what he wanted to have happen. So it's a whole ceremony to take place. He talks about in his document here, a whole ceremony to take place. And I'll just stop real quick and just check the chat. Kemet money. Thank you. God bless you so much. I appreciate it so much. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Kushite Kemet, so into Kushite Kemet. There's so much to learn into Kushite Kemet. I'm so into Kushite Kemet. That's true, John. There's so much to learn. I love it as well, and I love talking about Kush because Kush just doesn't get a lot of comments. So we're going to be talking a whole lot about it. There's a whole lot that we're going to be talking about ancient Kush. There's a whole lot there, and there's a whole lot that people learn, because I hope that we will appreciate that there's a deepness there. There's a spiritual deepness. There's a heritage, and there's something to be able to keep your culture together for thousands of years. Not only did the Kemetic people do it, but the Kushite people did it too. They kept their culture together in place for well over 1,000 years. That's a long time to keep a family in place, a culture in place, traditions in place, a country in place. That's a long time to do it. And there's something about that. There's something that goes in to bring that together. So I want to respect them. And I think it's important for us not to let the people of Kush be overshadowed by people's later interpretations of history. We need to look at them for the significant people they are. So back to this. So Psamtik is talking about his daughter becoming the new God's wife of the men. And as you look at that, this whole document is an amazing document. He goes through very many things in terms of how the whole court got together, how there was an entire procession where his daughter went to Auset. So he's sending his daughter because the 26th dynasty had their power. The seat of power was in the north, right? They were in the north, and obviously Kush was still powerful in the south, so they had to deal with that. But they were in the north, and they had all kinds of relations with the Ausarians and various things like that. But he wanted to send his daughter. Still, the powerhouse is still Auset. Ptahhotep is still the powerhouse, even though he's now king and he's king in the north. He still needs to have Ptahhotep on his side, if you will. So there's a whole procession that takes place where his daughter leaves, and I think it may take them 9 days on the trip that they do. And there's a whole procession. If she has a whole group of people that are going with her, a whole entourage, if you will, people are recognizing her as she travels down the Nile. They know what's going on, that she's going to become the next God's wife of the men. And that in doing so, she's dressed in a certain way. And he talks about exactly when this took place, because this didn't take place right away. Even though the 26th dynasty came into power and the Kushite people had gone, they did not right away remove Shepenwepet II from her position. They didn't do that right away. It took time. So that was a great deal of respect for Shepenwepet II, who was this Nubian priestess. There was a great deal of respect for her. They did not remove her right away. There was a lot going on, and this thing had to be done right, if you will. And so as he talks about how they have a huge procession. It takes days, and they go all the way down to Auset, and how there was a whole reception for Necrotis when she got there. And as part of her reception, the priests meet her. They greet her. The people in Auset, in the area, in the town, they get them out to meet her because they understand that this is a significant thing that she's doing. This is a significant woman. This is a significant, accomplishment, and in a significant office, right? So, at this time, you have this Shepenwepet II, who is a Nubian woman, a Nubian of birth, who had a different political entity, and she is the most powerful woman, one of the most powerful people in all of Kemet. She is one of the most powerful people in all of Kemet because of the temple that she's basically running and the office that she's been set to. And this kind of gives you an idea. And this is one of the documents that tells you the amount of power and resources that she had at her disposal. So he talks about his daughter going, and that, his daughter was the daughter of the king of Upper and Lower Kemet and Necrotis, and that he comes to the house of Amen. And he talks about, how this is a whole procession, a whole reception for her, and how they're looking at Amen and Montu and millions of years and millions of years of stability they want to be upon her. And he talks about not just that Shepenwepet II and her niece Amenadis had to take and receive Necrotis, and they basically wrote a contract. And I'll kind of give you a summary of it right here that you can take a look and see. We, Shepenwepet II, and Amenadis I, basically we have given to you all of our property. So it's really Amenadis II, but we give to you all our property. This is her and her niece. We give to you all our property in field and in the town, that you will abide on our throne, and you will abide, and you will do this forever. And then basically what they were doing, they were accepting her, and the witnesses were the prophets that were there, and the priests were there. They were basically accepting this new woman who was Psamtik's daughter and saying, we will grant you our property. We will allow you to sit on our throne. And they basically had to sign this. It was like a written document that was basically proof that they were allowing her to now take the throne. And this was a part of the ceremony that needed to take place. And it becomes remarkable because when you start to read through it and look at the kind of stuff they were giving her, as a part of this transition that took place, they had this list, literally this long list of resources from district to district. And I'm just showing you, just going through resources that were given to her: food, land, bread, wine, all kinds of things from various people all over the area, from various, not just the priests that were there, but from the other temples across Kemet, the major temples in Memphis and Hekapatah, very important temples, were all sending these resources to Shepenwepet II, and for her to give and to transfer over to this new God's wife of Amen. So as you start to think about it, you start to understand and realize that she was a very important person, a very powerful person in ancient Kemet during her lifetime. It wasn't just a matter of there being just, one thing taking place or this thing taking place. She was a very important person, a significant, and this is her. This is an image of her in Kemet. And we never talk about these Nubian women. So, we've talked about this a lot, and we're understanding that we obviously have different political entities, but, there are Nubian people who are priestesses like Shepenwepet II, and there's the first and the second. There are Nubian people who are priestesses like Kawit and Auset in the Middle Kingdom from Mentuhotep II. There are Nubian warriors and soldiers in the Old Kingdom and the New Kingdom and the Middle Kingdom. You have people all throughout Kemetic society that have different political entities that they came from that were as a part of the society. And we're told by a lot of people that Nubians were just this one way. And a lot of times they just don't give you the other side of the story, even though the information and the context and the historical data is there. The historical information is there. So I want to kind of wrestle a little bit, because I feel like Shepenwepet II was a remarkable person. I feel like she was a strong Nubian woman. I feel like she had a legacy that was significant, not only to her people, not only was she carrying the prayers, if you will, of the entire nation in her mouth and in her heart, but she was also carrying the well-being of her father and eventually her brother on her shoulders in terms of that prayer, as well as basically having resources where she was basically running, or one of the most important people at Petshut. And we talk about, and you see some of the people who were supports for her. I'll see if we can kind of pull this up as well, as we kind of look at it. Some of the people, this gentleman right here, this gentleman was basically her steward. This gentleman right here was the assistant for Shepenwepet II. Shepenwepet II had many people who were her stewards, who were her personal, they took care of her, her servants, her personal attendees, if you will. And this gentleman right here was a man who was assigned to be Shepenwepet's personal steward. And you can see some things that were written by him, and some things that he talked about, and some things that were written by other people who were stewards of her aunt. And so she didn't just have she had a whole team of people that she was dealing with. And this is actually a beautiful the depiction, a beautiful carving of the man who was the steward of Shepenwepet II. And it gives you an understanding that she had significant prayers and a significant weight on her shoulders. So when we start to talk about priestesses and priests, they were not insignificant. They were not unimportant. They were not just a relic of the past. These were people who had significant, they thought about and talked about the well-being of the country. Imagine if you have someone whose job it was to think about the spiritual well-being of the country, the mental well-being of the country, the emotional well-being of the country. Think about that, the happiness of the country, and not in some esoteric, fluffy, fly-by-night way. Somebody whose job it was to really take care of and see to it that the country was literally at peace. The country was literally fulfilled. The country was literally experiencing Hotep, right? And doing that through their service to God, doing that through, I know these things bring about peace. I know living in a certain way, having laws according to God, laws according to Ma'at, and living that helps us live out peace, and helping the king, the ruler, be the person to set out the laws and enforce the laws. So that if we are ruling in a way, and we've seen that in so many instances, whether we talk about the instructions to Merikari, when we talked about the teachings of Ptahhotep, we talked about that. When we talked about the whole idea of Ma'at, the Perut, the Book of the Dead, if you will, the pyramid text. There's so many different texts, a plethora of resources in ancient Kemet that talk about when you administer the government, when you administer the laws, you must do it justly. If you do it justly, you would be at peace and the people would be at peace. So this was something more than there was just a fly-by-night type of resources and things they did. So I just want to remember these Nubian women who were priestesses in ancient Kemet. I want to remember them today. I thank you so much for commenting. I pray that you share this with somebody. Let me see what your comments are and your thoughts down there in the comments. I very much appreciate it. And God bless you. Thank you very much. Thank you so much for joining me.